Okay, so what I want to do today is I want to look at the Upanishads in particular. We mentioned the Isha Upanishad, the Upanishad that had to do with the origin of the universe. Today, I want to look at a different one called the Katha Upanishad, and it's going to give us a way of living our life. And so I want to begin by a little bit of discussion of what the Upanishads are, a little more the specifics of what they're all about, and then we will take a look at this Upanishad. So to begin, we need to remember that the Upanishads are part of the Vedas. They are written towards the end of the Vedas. There's a form of Hinduism, which is perhaps the most popular form of Hinduism today, called Vedanta, Veda, with Anta at the end, meaning the end of the Vedas, and and so we need to so if we look at the Upanishads, then in connection with the Vedas, they are a continuation of that tradition. However, the Upanishads have their own particular sort of approach, and we'll look at what that is, but much more philosophical and spiritual in approach. They're also much more universal. They don't appear to be only geared towards the Brahmins, the priestly class, but geared towards anyone who is seeking some sort of spiritual liberation. So let's jump in, and we'll get some specifics about what these are. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay. So the Upanishads, the word means to sit down near. Upa is near, knee is down, and sit, you can see the cognate there, shad, is to sit. And so the idea is that you have a group of disciples, like that first scene there, a group of disciples that are sitting down near the teacher. And so they sit down near the teacher, and the teacher tells stories or gives philosophical discussions. And so these are supposed to be those philosophical discussions. Again, I mentioned that they are the end of the Vedas, so they're part of the Vedas, but as you recall, the Nasadiya Sutta, for example, was written between 2000 and 3000 BCE, and these are written around 500 or so BCE, so much later. Another thing that sets them apart is their focus on this relationship between the Atman and the Brahman, right? This underlying principle, this underlying reality. Some may see it as a personal deity, others may see it as something impersonal, but something that underlies all things. And then the Atman, our ultimate self, right? The unchanging part of us, whatever that might be, whether that's our consciousness or something else. But these are important metaphysical concepts and theological concepts, right? So philosophical ideas that are central to Hinduism, and that's their discussion. The earliest Upanishads do predate the Buddha, but some were written around the same time as the Buddha. And that includes the Isha Upanishad, which we talked about before, and then the Katha Upanishad, which we'll discuss here. And so both of these are important and central to the Upanishads. There are 12 or 13 what they call principal Upanishads, although I think there are 108 total. But the core ones, these 12 or 13, are studied which much more closely today. So the Katha Upanishad. And this will be fairly short discussion of it, but what I want us to think about is the story of the Katha Upanishad, right? And so at the beginning, we have a son, right, speaking to his father, and his son, his father has given away these cows, right? All of these cows, and is seen as this sort of great gesture of of um, of philanthropy or um, and the father has done this thing which is supposed to be this sort of great offering, right? And the son sees through the father's action, says, well, look what you've just done, right? You have all these cows, but these cows are all old, right? They're all they're no longer useful. They're no longer producing milk, right? They would, they really are just costing us a lot of money to keep feeding them. And what you've done is you've offloaded these, right? You've offloaded this drain to your your own household, and you've given them to someone else to try to take care of, to have to take care of. You've done it in this great gesture of kindness, but what you really have done is you've really just given away something that is you know um, uh, um, something that is in a sense wrong, and evil, and um, so Nachiketa, the son, says, "Hey, Dad, what are you going to do? Are you going to give me away to somebody?" And he keeps pushing and prodding his dad until his dad gets angry and says, "Where do I send you? I'm going to send you to death." Right? This sort of blows up in this anger, and so Nachiketa says, "Fine, right? Fine, send me to death. I'm going to death." And so off, Nachiketa goes, and he goes to death, personified by the god Yama. So Yama is out, right? Yama's busy out, picking up souls, and so Nachiketa sits outside of Yama's household, right, for 3 days, um, and in those 3 days, uh, um, Nachiketa has shown this great patience. And when death returns, death says, "Hey, you've you've been sitting around waiting for me, and I haven't been a very good host. No one brought you in, and giving you some tea or whatever, right? And so, what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to offer you 3 wishes, 3 boons. So the 3 wishes, the wishes of Nachiketa, that Yama gives to Nachiketa, are really important because they help us understand the spiritual path, right, as being taught by the Katha Upanishad. And so the first boon that Nachiketa gets or uses, he uses to reconcile himself with his father. So he says, what I really want is I want my father to look upon me in the same way that he looked upon me on the day that I was born, right? With that heart filled with love and hope and so on. And so his original sort of the first step, we can sort of see this as the first step in the spiritual path, is this reconciliation, right? It's reconciled with those around us, with our family, with our loved ones, with humanity. And so that's the first boon. The second boon is this fire sacrifice, and he asks Yama to teach this great fire sacrifice, um, the sacrifice that will lead the one who is doing the sacrifice directly to full awakening, right? And so he teaches him the fire sacrifice, right? And so we get the sort of the moral aspect first, with the reconciliation with Father, and then we get the sacrifice, the ritualistic aspect, the devotional part, right? The devotion to God through the rituals, right? This connection with the old Vedas, right? The Vedic literature. But then there's still one boon left. And so Yama's like, okay, fine. You reconciled with your father. Now you've learned this sacrifice, and in fact, you've done it so well that I've named it after you. But third, what are you going to ask for? And so what Nachiketa asks for is to understand the secret of death, right? Understand how it is that we continue to live in this existence, and then we come and cease to exist, right? What is the secret behind that? What is the reality behind that? What's the way of overcoming that? And it's important that Yama is like, hey, you know what? You don't want this, right? I'll give you anything else, right? And he parades all of these temptations in front of Nachiketa. Like, here, why don't you go and take, you know, um, the sort of take all of this wealth, right? And be happy forever, or I can let you live for thousands of years, or you can have all of this power, or you can have any beautiful woman that you like, or whatever, right? All of these sort of temptations, really common in these types of stories where there's a temptation. We'll see this in the Buddha. You may think of similarities with the temptations of Jesus, right? But these temptations is like, hey, do you really want this thing? And so Yama's really trying to persuade Nachiketa, like, no, you want something else, right? You don't want to know this secret. And at the end, Nachiketa says, like, well, what does all this matter? Why does any of this stuff matter? Right? What's the import of any of this? Because at the end of it all, I'm going to die. This stuff's all going to shrivel up and die. It's all going to go away. It's all changing, right? I can't keep the wealth for eternity, right? And this power will change. All of this is going to wither away. And so finally Yama's like, wow, this kid's serious, right? And he says, fine, I'll sit down and I'll teach you. And what he says about it is like, this is hard, right? This is not going to be easy. This isn't something I can just like grant you, but you have to learn it. And he calls it the razor's edge, right? The path towards moksha, towards enlightenment, towards understanding the secret of life and death, is a razor's edge. And so he begins to teach. And primary teaching, which we get here, is this distinction between what is Preya and Shreya, right? Preya being what is pleasant, and Shreya being what is beneficial, right? And so Yama says, we all have these things that we want, that we find pleasing in our lives, right? We all go for the candy drawer or whatever, right? We want those things that are pleasing to us. But those things that are pleasing to us are usually not things that are beneficial to us in the long run, right? They may satisfy our senses, our desires, temporarily, right? We may get what we want for right here, right now, in this moment. But at the end, we usually are dissatisfied with it. Like all those things that were paraded before Nachiketa, right? Like those are pleasurable things. But at the end of the day, they wither away, they die, right? And then they cause suffering. And this is important because when we get to our discussion of Buddhism, this desire and the dissatisfaction that arises from our attachments and from our desires and so on, right, is central to Buddhism and trying to understand and overcome our suffering. And so here, the Katha Upanishad is recognizing that this suffering is caused by pleasure, right? Caused by those things that we take to be pleasurable for the moment. And so we need to distinguish, he says, between what is pleasurable and what is beneficial, right? What is pleases us and what's really good for us. And I put here this quote from the Phaedrus, which is by Plato, and where he also makes the same distinction. In every one of us, there are two ruling and directing principles whose guidance we follow wherever they lead. The one being innate desire for pleasure, right? The other, an acquired judgment, which aspires after excellence. Now, notice the translation here says that one is being an innate desire for pleasure, right? That we just have that. And it's not something we develop. We just have it. We want things which are pleasurable. The other is an acquired judgment, so it takes practice, and so it's something that we have to do over and over and over, and it's a habit that is acquired over time. But that habit is acquired over time, right? That Shreya is going towards what is beneficial. At the end is what brings excellence, what brings us true, deep happiness, right? Not momentary happiness, but true, deep happiness. And so it's the training of the will, right? A training of the will, because our will is not naturally does not naturally go towards what is most beneficial, right? It goes towards what we want right here, right now, what we desire. And so that's the training, and that's the beginning of the work for Nachiketa. You know, the initial, the starting point for the path is this path of learning to prefer or follow Shreya over Freya. And so Yama uses an analogy, right? And this metaphor of the chariot. And he says, okay, imagine a chariot, and a chariot is being pulled by four horses. There's an individual in the chariot, right? The rider, and there's the charioteer. And if we sort of assign roles to each of these, we can begin to understand ourselves. And so he says that Preya, that pleasure, if we allow ourselves untrained to follow that, right? That's the horses untrained, right? The horses go towards what they want, right? Towards what's pleasurable, towards what they desire. And so if we have those horses untrained, they're just going to follow this and that, and it's going to lead right towards suffering in the end. It's not going to lead towards true happiness. You know, and it may be bad for the horses, right? But what we have, right, is we have a charioteer, and we have the reins, and we can use our mind, our intelligence, to train the horses, to get them to follow where the mind wants them to go. And I think we're aware of this, right? Where we end up doing things which, you know, maybe we find pleasurable, but at the end we don't really our sort of better judgment doesn't want, right? We do things we don't really want, right? There's sort of like these two parts to us, and this is what the Katha Upanishad is talking about. There's these two parts of us, and we seem to ignore the part that knows what's best for us over and over and over again. And so the goal of spiritual life is to train that part of us that goes towards what's pleasurable to do what's actually beneficial for us. And so we train the horses. The charioteer trains the horses and leads the horses towards what's good. So those horses are our senses, right? Go towards what the senses want. And they follow various paths that they desire. And then the intelligence or the mind, so the charioteer through the reins is able to train the horses to go towards, what is beneficial. The chariot itself is the body, right? It's and so that's the physicality. But the rider, right? What seems to be the passive element is the Atman, that unchanging part, right? The part that doesn't experience change. So even though the horses may be going towards what's pleasurable and not towards what's beneficial, it doesn't change the rider, right? The rider remains within the chariot. It's just an unrealization of that rider. The rider does not realize themselves. And so it's only through the proper training of the horses, of the senses, of the body, the chariot, right? Getting it to go where you want it to go, where the mind wants it to go, where the intelligence, right, reason wants to go, that we're able to finally realize ourselves. And so when we can align, right, what the Atman wants, right, the enjoyer, the rider, the Atman, that true self within us, right, with the senses and the mind, right, that's when we have realization. He says, formed out of the union of the Atman, the senses and the mind, him they call the enjoyer. And so the quest, according to this, the path is to train that, right? That's a training. It's a and so just sort of think about it as training an animal, right, or training yourself in new habits, right? It's that repeated, difficult, over and over and over again until it becomes easier slowly over time, and then eventually, once that becomes easy, right, then it's an enjoyer, right? Then the mind enjoys, or excuse me, the rider enjoys the path, right? The senses and the mind are all in alignment with one another. And so that's the way towards this this eventual realization, is the training of the mind and the body and the senses through a charioteer that is sort of got the best interest of the Atman at heart. So here's another sort of depiction of the chariot from the Katha Upanishad. Right, so we have the intellect driving the chariot. You have the mind, right, that which is sort of directing the senses. You have the senses themselves, which are the horses, right? But as you go farther and farther back, you get to the charioteer themselves, and that charioteer themselves is the Atman, right? The true self, the complete self. So that's the overall sort of discussion or teaching of the Katha Upanishad. The core of it. So remember, we begin with the path, with this reconciliation, right? Like, I need to be reconciled with my father, reconciled with the world before I begin this path, right? Then there's the devotion, right? The sort of handing over the self in a devotional act, right? The fire sacrifice. And then once that's done, okay, I can begin the work, the hard work of training the self. Through the repeated bringing back of the mind towards Shreya, right? Towards what's beneficial, away from what is just pleasurable. And of course, these things can line up. And it's not that like what's pleasurable and what's beneficial can't sometimes line up. But the point is that if that happens to be the case, that happens to be the case. But we're doing it because it's beneficial, right? We're performing the act because it's beneficial for the purpose of the benefit, right? So again, it's a return over and over and over again. And just to sort of to come back on the loop to Plato, right? So Plato, in his chariot analogy, very similar, except his sort of discussions, we have these two different horses, one of which, is going towards what's beneficial, towards what's excellent, the other which is following just desire. But still, it's this rational self, the intellect, which is guiding and training the horses to perform and do and follow the path towards what is excellent. So that's the Katha Upanishad. Again, it provides us a sort of a window into the thinking of Hinduism and the Hindu sort of understanding of realization of the self, of enlightenment, of moksha, but it also helps provides us this this comparison between the sort of ancient Indian discussion and ancient Greek discussion of very similar sorts of ideas. So thanks so much for listening. And that is all I have on the Katha Upanishad. Thanks. Oh, jokes. I have one more. Calming the mind and senses. So only when man is the mind, wrap this up, I apologize. With the thoughts and the five senses stand still, and the buddhi or the intellect does not waver, they call that the highest path. This is one calls yoga, the stillness of the senses, concentration of the mind. It is not thoughtless, heedless sluggishness. Yoga is creation and dissolution. So this is that end. This is the secret of life and death, right? Once you've realized that Atman, self, right? That permanent, unchanging self, which can only be realized when we train the mind, can we understand that secret of death and birth and immortality, right? Overcoming the death and birth. So, all right. So after my false conclusion, here's my real conclusion. Thanks so much for listening. We'll continue on with the Bhagavad Gita.